Hi there, welcome to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Caesar, and I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor, former chronic migraine sufferer, and I help women from all over the country rediscover a migraine-free life. So welcome to the podcast today. You know, a couple podcasts ago, I did a reaction video to a Facebook reel, and you know what happens whenever you click on anything on Facebook? You start to get more of that. So now every time I go into Facebook, I'm getting these migraine Facebook reels, and let me tell you, it has not been real good for my irritability. Okay, so let's just stick with the trend here, and because I found another video that I want to do a reaction, and you know, I'm kind of joking a little bit here, making a little light of it, but this is very serious actually, because like I've talked about on the podcast, what you believe about your migraines will logically dictate how you handle your migraines, how you proceed forward with your migraines. I'm not saying that you're manifesting. Like I don't believe in manifestation. We are humans. We're not gods. We cannot create things with our mind and with our thoughts and so on. I'm not saying that this is a manifestation issue. The example that I've talked about a lot on the podcast is if you believe that your migraines are genetic, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to try to look for a root cause answer and then take action to address those root causes in the hopes to feel better, right? If you believe that your genetics, which are unchangeable, are driving the migraines, then it would be much more logical for someone with that belief to look for medication, pharmaceutical options to try to suppress the symptoms that are there because of unchangeable, unmovable genetics, right? So it's very important. This is why I talk about these themes a lot on the podcast. It's very important because culturally we're told a lot of things about why we're not feeling well, right? Why we have this chronic condition like migraines or other conditions. We're given a lot of explanations, and unfortunately in our culture we have a false understanding. The dominant understanding of health and disease, unfortunately, is false in our culture. And so people are being told something that isn't true, and then their actions are the logical next steps or the logical outcome of what they believe to be true, and then people continue to suffer. And you know, let's look around here, right? Unfortunately, Americans are feeling worse and worse. We've been talking the last couple of years, which I think is very productive. We've been talking a lot the last couple of years about the rising rate of chronic disease, not just with, you know, migraines, but with other chronic diseases. It's not genetics, right? That's obvious. Our genes have not changed in the past 50 years. People are, unfortunately, they're getting sicker and sicker. I started naturopathic medical school 20 years ago now. I can't believe it. This August, it'll be 20 years. So I've been in the field for a long time. I've been in practice. It'll be 16 years now this summer. And just in my time in the field, because I started working with patients even as a student. So, you know, almost 20 years of working with patients, like a whole generation has passed, and people are even more sicker today than they were 15 years ago. And I have mentors that are in their 70s and have been at this for 50 years, and they will say, you know, what used to take, you know, XYZ, this amount, you know, I used to be able to help somebody turn this around, you know, in 3 months, now takes a year, or, you know, so people are getting sicker. We're starting to get some awareness around it, but if what we're told the reason why is false, we're not going to get any better. Okay. All of this to say, to set the stage for this reel, okay? So I disagree with the reel, and what's very concerning for me is this reel was created by a neurologist, okay? So a neurologist on the East Coast who has a pretty substantial social media following. He created this reel. So this is not like a health coach. You know, there's like when you go on social media, right? A lot of people that are making these health-oriented reels, they're, you know, well-meaning people that, you know, had a health condition, and, you know, most of them worked with someone, they're feeling a little bit better, and they're very motivated, they're very passionate, and they want to help other people, and they start making some of these reels. This is a neurologist. Hi there. I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client, Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month. And as you can imagine, This was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. If your neurologist has an incorrect understanding and conception of chronic migraines, then, right, he's not going to give you a treatment or a recommendation that's in alignment with what you actually need. Okay, so let's dive in here, right? Let's dive in here and take a look at the real.
Migraine brains aren't normal, and that's not an insult. They're more sensitive and they are wired differently. There's a real link between migraine and neurodivergence, things like ADHD and autism. We're talking higher rates, shared genetics, and similar brain patterns. For example, recent research shows that 35% of migraine patients exhibit autistic traits compared to 17% of controls. And another study found that patients with ADHD had a 2-fold increased risk of developing migraine. That's not a coincidence. These brains process more input and filter less of it out. Light, sound, stress, everything hits harder. That same brain is often more perceptive, more detail-oriented, but it also burns out faster. And when that system gets pushed too far, it crashes. That's the migraine. So what if we've been thinking about migraine completely wrong? What if it's not just a disease, but a brain type?
Yeah, what if we have been thinking about migraine completely wrong and it's your neurologist that's thinking about it incorrectly? A ton to unpack here, okay? So I wanted to give you the full overview first, but let's dive in here again, okay? So at the beginning, he's saying that, migraine brains aren't normal.
Migraine brains aren't normal, and that's not an insult. They're more sensitive and they are wired differently.
So he says they're wired differently. Again, this is not a layperson. This is not your coworker chatting with you around the coffee maker on a Monday morning. This is a neurologist saying that migraine brain, okay, is wired differently. Most people are going to take that to mean that, like, there's something wrong with my brain, is wired differently, there's something anatomical, right? Now, certainly, people can have anatomical issues within their brain that generate head pain. But I'm talking about the typical classic migraine. You've gone into the ER, your brain is exploding, right? You're like, there has to be a tumor in here. There has to be a brain bleed. There's no way that a human would be experiencing this level of pain without some massive disaster going on inside of my skull, right? So you go in, right? You get the imaging. There's nothing there, right? I mean, how many times does this happen? And to say that is wired differently, okay, so are you claiming that we have the technology, the imaging technology, to map out the individual neurons within the brain? We don't have that technology. So this statement from a neurologist is completely outrageous. This was before COVID, this was several years ago, I had a client who told me that when she asked her neurologist, why am I getting these migraines? Her neurologist told her, Well, it's because you have faulty wiring in your brain. When she told me this, I was like dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that a neurologist would say this to a patient. But now here we have another neurologist saying basically the same thing. I really hope that this does not become some sort of trend that takes off within neurology. It's absolutely outrageous to me to have a neurologist talk like this. Your brain is not wired differently. Are you more sensitive to sensory input? Absolutely you are, right? And we've talked about this on the podcast, but I want you to hold that thought because I'm going to bring this all together at the end, okay? So yes, of course, particularly when we are in the throes of a migraine, right? The light is, right? Where's my sunglasses? I got to wear sunglasses indoors. I got to shut the curtains. Oh, will you stop making that noise? You're driving me crazy. Stop tapping. Stop moving around so much. Will you just stand still? I can't take all the motion, right? I can't take all the noise, the commotion. Oh, don't you smell something? What do you mean you can't smell that? It smells horrible, right? Oh, that cheap perfume, the hamburger cooking, right? Whatever it is, right? Of course, we're hypersensitive to all of these sensory inputs. And many chronic migraine sufferers, even when they're not in the throes of a migraine, they're still hypersensitive to those sensory inputs on a day-to-day basis. All of that is correct. I'm going to tie this together at the end, so I want you to hang on to that, but I want you to just throw away this nonsense that your brain isn't normal and that it's wired differently. This is absolutely not true. If it were true, how would I be sitting here, right, not suffering from chronic migraines anymore? How would my clients not be suffering from chronic migraines anymore? It's absolutely ridiculous.
There's a real link between migraine and neurodivergence.
So now we have another sort of buzzword that's being thrown around more and more, and this is neurodivergence, okay? And so let's take a look at sort of a summary of what neurodivergence is. This is from the Google AI overview. Neurodivergent is a non-medical term. People whose brains function, learn, and process information differently than what is considered typical. So this is not a medical term, this is not a medical diagnosis, but we have a neurologist using the term and addressing it to chronic migraine sufferers. I'm a Gen Xer. I know everybody's getting tired of Gen Xers on their rants, but when I was a child, people who were a little bit different, a little bit eclectic, looked at things differently, made different connections between things a little, in a unique way and maybe in an innovative way. These people were not labeled. They were considered to be, maybe a little quirky, maybe a little different. Maybe yours truly was one of these people that looked at things in a little bit different way and put things together in a way that wasn't typically how people looked at things. To put a label on this, I mean, this again, like what you're describing here is just a normal human experience. Some people look at the world a little bit differently than other people, and they learn differently or they have to process information differently. Again, I mean, when I was in school, some people, most of the kids learned a certain way, but you always had a couple kids where they had to, if it was a certain topic, they had to spend a little bit more time on it, or they had to diagram it, or they had to do different little studying techniques and so on to learn the information. This is just sort of the diversity of human experience. It's not a label, it's not a problem, it doesn't warrant a ribbon, okay? And again, when we're thinking about things, right, how we think about things will logically influence and sort of dictate the actions that we take as a result. So again, according to Google AI, it covers natural variations in human neurology, such as autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, rather than illnesses. Autism it's an illness that you can recover from. ADHD is an illness, it's a condition, it's a diagnosis that you can recover from. Dyslexia, this also is something that you can recover from. So here we have a contradiction. So first, it's a normal variation. It's not an illness, such as, and then they list 3 illnesses. I think that's very pertinent here. So I want you to hang on. He's going to continue to touch on autism and ADHD.
Things like ADHD and autism.
Here we go, right? Now he's bringing up ADHD and autism.
We're talking higher rates, shared genetics, and similar brain patterns.
So he's saying higher rates, shared genetics, and similar brain patterns. So first of all, our genetics are not completely dictating everything. We don't have enough genes in the human genome to completely dictate everything that happens in the human body. So when they started the Human Genome Project, they anticipated that we were going to have, anywhere from 5 to 10 times the number of genes than we actually have, because they assumed that genetics were dictating things a lot more than they actually are. And when they actually discovered how relatively few genes we have compared to the complexity of the human organism, they realized that genes will turn on and off, that it's much more complicated than, oh, here's the autism gene, here's the migraine gene, here's the ADHD gene. It's not like that. What they have discovered is that some genetics that in combination will cause your liver to run detoxification pathways slower than average. And there are some genetic patterns where people will run their detoxification pathways in their liver faster than average. So there are some genetics that will allow those pathways to run faster or slower than what's typical. And this is very, very important to understand. I did this genetic testing on myself many years back, maybe about 5 years back, and sure enough, the combination of genetic SNPs or patterns that I have make me a slower detoxifier. Okay, so even when I'm at my best, right, my highest potential to run my detoxification pathways, they're going to run a little bit slower than the average person, even when I'm at my best. Okay, so this is where, there are genetic components. Look at Lance Armstrong, look at professional cyclists. They have genetics that allow them to run the Tour de France. I love to bike. It's one of my favorite activities, but I'm not going to be in the Tour de France, right? It's like I don't have the genetics for that, right? So we all have some limitations. We have some things that we have a potential for. We have some things that just, it's not going to happen for us. It's just not in the cards for us. And so for some people, even when they're at their best, they're going to run their detoxification pathways a little bit slower. Some people, right, they have the potential to run them a lot faster. And what they found is that many alcoholics genetically run their detoxification pathways a little bit faster, which really makes sense. I used to work in addiction medicine. I used to treat alcoholics and addicts, and I don't say this as any sort of disparaging remark, but to be an alcoholic, it would be very difficult for me to be an alcoholic as a slow detoxifier, because I'm going to be really hungover. I'm going to be really feeling it. Alcoholics, if they're a fast detoxifier, they're not going to feel the effects of the alcohol that they're consuming as much, and that's going to make it it's going to make it easier for them to become addicted to alcohol. Some things have their benefits, some things have their negatives. But I want you to remember this, okay? Because he's saying that there's some similar genetics between autism, ADHD, and migraines. Hang on to that. Let's keep going.
And another study found that patients with ADHD had a twofold increased risk of developing migraine.
So he doesn't specifically list the autistic traits that migraine sufferers have in common with autists. What are some of those traits? Well, the hypersensitivity to sensory input. I believe that's what he's talking about. I can't read his mind. He's not being specific. And there are many, many traits to autism. But one of the characteristic traits of autism is the hypersensitivity to noise, to light, to, clothing, right? The touch sensation, right? That's a very prominent symptom. Is that in common with migraine sufferers? Yes. Okay. Hang in there with me. Okay. Keep noting. ADHD, the behavior that is typical with ADHD, the hyperactivity, the movement, right? The difficulty maintaining focus, moving from one thing to the next. It's well documented that the brainwave activity of certain brainwaves, this is well documented amongst ADHD sufferers, is actually low. Not high, low. This is why when you give a stimulant to someone suffering from ADHD, whether it be coffee or amphetamines, they improve, right? They feel like they have more focus, okay? So when you stimulate the brain, when you give a stimulant to the brain of someone with ADHD, they feel better. The behavior that you see, sort of the moving, the hyperactivity, that's a coping mechanism, so to speak. What the body is trying to do is it's trying to generate on its own. It's trying to generate more brainwave activity through the movement to try to get the brain kind of revved up, get it working better. People with ADHD, even though they look like they're keyed up and they may feel like they're keyed up, they're actually experiencing more what you would call a brain fog. And you can see that on the brainwave patterns. With autism, like I say, he's not being specific about the traits. I'm assuming he's talking about the hypersensitivity to sensory input. And now we have a condition that at its root is a brain fog condition. Hypersensitivity to sensory input and brain fog are textbook toxicity symptoms. A few weeks ago, I did a podcast on really what's driving those physical symptoms of the migraine, and that's a tremendous overload of metabolic waste materials and toxins. Autism, at its root, is a massive and catastrophic overload to metabolic waste material and toxins within the body of the child, and it's such a severe and profound overload that it disrupts the development of the brain and impacts other areas of the body as well. ADHD, again, those symptoms associated with ADHD are textbook toxicity symptoms. So when you're looking at common genetics, I have colleagues that work with autistic children and they get great results. Autism, you're not born with autism. It's a very, very serious health condition. The three things that I talk about on this podcast, what I call the three principles, the three things that our body needs to maintain its state of health or recover its health when it falls out of health. Those three principles are at play with every health condition, including migraines, including autism. But there are some health conditions where the weight of the condition is more heavy in one of those three principles. And autism, it's a significant overload of metabolic waste materials and toxins in the body. Same with migraines, same with ADHD. My colleagues that work with autistic children, this is one of the major things that they do is to clear these metabolic waste materials and toxins from these kids. They do the genetic testing and they find that those kids are slow detoxifiers genetically. So again, he's not being specific around the shared genetics between autism and ADHD and migraines, but I bet it's these known SNPs that will slow down your detoxification pathways. So if you have a child with any of these very catastrophic chronic conditions, like autism, like migraines, like ADHD, when the condition develops, we feel like, how'd this happen, right? Where did this come from? I was fine until this happened. I've never had a client that didn't have other symptoms in addition to the migraines. My colleagues that work with autistic children, the children had other lower level health problems, symptoms prior to the onset of the autism. Same with ADHD, right? We don't understand that the body generates early warning symptoms before the big one hits. We don't understand that. We don't know how to interpret that. I've talked about many of these symptoms on the podcast, on other podcasts. So, for us, it's like this happened out of the blue. How did this hit me? What's going on here? But we're not realizing that, 10 years before the migraine started, there were these early warning symptoms that we were developing blockers or deficiencies or missing pieces. Our body didn't have what it needed within these three principles. And my colleagues that work with ADHD and autism, when they do the full review, the full case history, the medical history of the child suffering from this, it's very obvious, right, that there were brewing things prior to the onset of these conditions. Hi there. I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month, and as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. You're not born this way. And this is what is becoming, frankly, pretty insidious and is really going to harm people. When you go on Google AI and you say neurodivergent, what is that? Let me look that up. And it says that neurodivergent covers natural variations in human neurology, not illnesses, but natural variations such as autism, ADHD. These are treatable and recoverable conditions, just like migraines. If we start calling migraine sufferers neurodivergent people, just saying, well, this is just kind of a natural variation and it's not an illness. If you believe that to be true, what are you logically going to do then, right? You're not going to say, hey, maybe my body doesn't have what it needs to function optimally. And, if I knew what those things were and I made some changes, I could feel better and, live a full life. You're not going to go down that road. You're not going to even consider something like that if you say, well, I'm neurodivergent, I have migraines, and it's a normal variation and it's not an illness. I can't believe that a neurologist would say this. This is going to just destroy people's lives. Like I say, I've talked about this phenomenon on the podcast before. We have to be very careful about what we believe to be true, because if we believe something that's false, we're naturally going to behave in ways that are also going to perpetuate the falsehood and aren't going to serve us.
Not a coincidence. These brain
Yeah, it's not a coincidence, right? When you have a overload of metabolic waste material and toxins in your body is going to generate predictable and recurring symptoms. The difference is, for a child with autism, the toxin overload is massive, catastrophic, okay? The toxin overload inside of our bodies when we have migraines, it's significant. It's no joke. It's causing us a lot of suffering, but thank God it's not the catastrophic level that occurs in a child with autism. ADHD, again, it's a toxin overload, but thank goodness it's not a catastrophic toxin overload. But yeah, it's not a coincidence. The symptoms, the recurring pattern of symptoms that the body generates, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that people with autism, ADHD, chronic migraines, they're all hypersensitive to sensory input. This is not a coincidence. When I talked about this toxin overload phenomenon and how it drives the physical symptoms of the migraine, I pulled out some toxicology reports as to what people experience physically when they ingest or are exposed to different poisons, toxins, okay? There are recurring patterns. That's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. So when you see things over and over again that you say, wow, yeah, sensitive to sensory inputs, that happens, when people are exposed to XYZ toxin. Okay, well, I've got that same exact thing happening when we have a diagnosis of autism and ADHD and migraines. Like, this is what pattern recognition actually means. This is what putting it together actually means.
Brains process more input and filter less of it out.
Yes, when you become hypersensitive, when you become hypervigilant, when you become hyper-aware, the body will sort of let in more stimuli. So it's well documented, right? We are bombarded by stimuli continuously. And it's well documented that the brain or the body sort of filters that out, because if it didn't, we go crazy, right? But when you get into a hypersensitive state, a hyper-alert state, a hyper-aware state, those filters start to drop, and the body says, "No, I'm hyper-aware, right? I've got to keep track of everything. I got to let more in because I've got to be more hyper-vigilant." So those sort of filters start to drop, and yes, we will start to process more. Absolutely, that is correct. But why is that happening? It's not because your brain is wired differently, like he claims. This, again, is a classic toxicity symptom. When you have these toxin molecules in your body, your physical body gets really keyed up because these molecules irritate your body. And so your body becomes hypersensitive, it becomes irritated, it starts to become sort of annoyed. Mentally and emotionally, we experience those things too. So we become more irritable, we become more keyed up, we startle easily. Somebody walks in the room and we're jumping and screaming, right? We're keyed up and hyper alert. That's the consequence of having a toxin overload in the body. This is very well documented when you read what people exhibit when they become poisoned with something. It's documented over and over again in the literature, going back thousands of years. This is well documented what happens when people have a poisoning, have a toxin exposure. The other critical factor is that you can, on the mental and emotional side, just totally separate from a toxin overload, you can develop hypervigilance, hyper-alertness, hyper-awareness as a coping mechanism to chaos. And this is a very prominent dynamic amongst migraine sufferers. So many migraine sufferers, just sort of to put a kind of a general label on it, were raised in a family dynamic where there was a lot of chaos. And when we are in an environment where there's a lot of chaos, we will cope with that. There's several different ways that people can cope with it. Some people will cope with it by sort of exiting the environment, right? These are the kids that they're never at home. They're always out on their bicycle. They're always, roaming the streets and the woods and so on, or they're always up in their room with the door shut, headphones on, right? They're kind of escaping the chaos. Another coping mechanism, which is much more prominent amongst women who are prone to migraines, is to try to make sense of the chaos, to try to order the chaos, to try to become the person who steps in and tries to tamp down the chaos, the fixer, the cleaner, okay? Those of us that are prone to migraines, that were raised in this type of an environment, we're much more likely to have employed that type of coping mechanism. We're not the escapers, we're the fixers. We're the people that are trying to step in and make sense of the chaos. In order to do that, you have to become hypervigilant and you have to become hyper alert, and you become very good at sort of picking up on very subtle signals, a little facial expression, a lift of an eyebrow, how heavy someone's footsteps are in the hallway. People will become very sensitive to that, and they will develop this hypervigilance and hyper-alertness. When that happens, you have to lower those filters. So that process can be there because of a toxin overload or because of this hypervigilance that's developed as a way of dealing or coping or surviving within a very chaotic environment. So again, what he's describing here, right? Yes, it's a known phenomenon amongst migraine sufferers. We become hypersensitive to things, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And a lot of times that will lead us to, laying awake at night and, what did I say in that meeting? And did I sound dumb, or did she take it the wrong way? Maybe I should have said this, right? Because we're hyper analyzing, hyper alert, hyper aware of any little thing that we're doing, how people are responding. Did it go well, right? Because we're trying to eliminate chaos and discomfort and things like that. And that is absolutely very draining.
Stress, everything gets harder. That same brain is often more perceptive, more detail-oriented, but it also burns out faster.
He's making this sound like it's your personality, right? Well, I'm just a detailed-oriented person. And certainly, right, some people are more detail-oriented. Some people are more high-level, right? There is a normal variation amongst personality and, people's way of looking at things and everything else. Now I guess we call it neurodivergent, right? It used to just be, just that's how this person is. They're a little quirky. If you are more detail-oriented, that is not due to your inherent personality or sort of characteristics. Let's go back to the child that was in a very chaotic family dynamic. The child that copes with that in this way of becoming hypervigilant, hyper alert, hyper aware, the fixer, the cleaner, the child that jumps in and tries to bring order in, calm, peace, problem solve, right? They're going to become very detail oriented in the process, because you can't do all of that unless you're really honing in on all the little details. This is different than having a sort of personality trait where you're more detail oriented than somebody that's more high level. Amongst migraine sufferers, right, the detail orientation may be naturally occurring, and a normal variant for the person. Or it may be a symptom of what was going on in that family dynamic. It might be a symptom of the coping mechanism that was developed. If that's the case, we're going to drain our vitality as a result. And I talk a lot about our vitality and how we have to have enough resiliency and vitality to keep ourselves out of our migraine zone. So it's very important that we understand, okay, is this actually, is my perfectionism, is my detail orientation, is my over-analysis, is that a symptom, or is it actually my personality? Okay, and this is something where we have to discern this. When I work with clients, I actually assess for these types of dynamics. And so when they pop up, I don't know for certain at the beginning if it's a symptom or if it is just sort of a natural personality variant for the person. If the person has 35 symptoms of a toxin overload, which is not uncommon for migraine sufferers to have 35, symptoms that indicate a toxin overload, physical symptoms that indicate a toxin overload. And when I ask them about their childhood experiences and family dynamics, there's a lot of chaos that's indicated. And they admit that, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, type A, I'm kind of the fixer, the cleaner. I beat myself up over tiny mistakes. I'll replay conversations and think to myself, did she take that the wrong way? Could I have said it better? Right? When you put all of that together, it kind of begs the question, is that detail orientation? Is it a symptom, or is it actually your personality, right? Do you see the pattern here? It becomes much more likely that that person is laying awake at 3 a.m, hyper aware of every little thing they did in the meeting and beating themselves up. It's much more likely that that's actually a toxicity symptom if they have a whole host of other toxicity symptoms, right? And then a family dynamic to boot that would have been contributing to this, rather than, right, it's just you inherent. This is his message, right? You inherently are just more detail oriented, and you're taking in all these sensory inputs because that's just how your brain is. That's just how your brain is wired. It's just wired to take in all these sensory inputs and be so detailed oriented. So you're going to burn out faster, and then then your brain is going to crash, and then you're going to get a migraine. That's right. If you believe that to be true, well, what can you do about it? Nothing, right? This is how my brain is wired. This is how I'm going to function, and I'll just keep burning myself out, and we'll hope for the best, right? versus when you put everything in context, right, with a full analysis. It's like, maybe I wouldn't be laying awake at 3 a.m. rehashing everything. Maybe I wouldn't be so, beat myself up so much. And, maybe I would be satisfied with just, my 80%. Everybody tells me you put in too much. You need to let it go. Why is this so important to you? Maybe I would feel better, more at ease. Maybe I'd be able to let things go and not be so worried about things.
Sound.
And I wouldn't be so hypersensitive to light and noise and sound and all of these sensory impressions, right? And I wouldn't have all these other toxicity symptoms that I have, like allergies and menstrual symptoms, and right, wouldn't be so irritable, which is another toxicity symptom, right? Maybe all of this would get better if I got these metabolic waste materials and toxins out of my body. If I believe that to be true, now I've got an avenue. Now I've got an approach. Now I've got some things that I could pursue. The neurologist's approach, this guy's approach, it's like, I can't do anything about this. I'm just going to have to hope for the best. Or, white knuckle myself, and be in a paranoid state. Is this going to tip me over? Is this too much? Is this too much? We either look at things from a truthful perspective or a false perspective. When we look at things from a false perspective and then our actions flow from that false perspective, we're going to continue to suffer. If we look at things from a true perspective and then our actions flow from that true perspective, our life is going to get better. This is the case whether you're talking about migraines or anything in your life.
That same brain is often more perceptive, more detail-oriented, but it also burns out faster. And when that system gets pushed too far, it crashes. That's the migraine. So what if we've been thinking about migraine completely wrong?
So what if we have been thinking about migraine completely wrong, right? This is why I do this podcast, because we absolutely have been thinking about migraine completely wrong. Okay. Your brain is not defective. Your brain is not wired different. I've seen this kind of talk, those of us that are prone to migraines, our brain, there's a prominent thought that it's like a primitive brain, like a Neanderthal brain. This is totally ridiculous. I thought this was completely ridiculous. Now we have a neurologist saying these types of things and lumping and conflating migraine with neurodivergence. Which is it a normal variation? Is it connected to an illness? People are misusing the term. They're not being precise with the term. Here's the thing, right? This is not a criticism. Anyone that goes into healthcare is doing it to help alleviate human suffering. People that become medical doctors, people that go on to become neurologists, they are trying to alleviate human suffering. Okay, I don't think this guy has some sort of, devious intent. He's trying to suck people in and he's trying to make people's lives even more miserable. I don't believe that. I really think he believes that he's on the right track and that he's onto something here with these connections. But he's not, okay? I went on his website. He's offering injections and so on, kind of all of the standard procedures that migraine sufferers are told that they need when their migraines get so bad that they failed all of, quote unquote, failed all of their abortive medications, failed a bunch of preventatives. Now we got to go into the various injections. Okay. So, God bless him. If this is the course that people want to pursue, that's fine. If doing Botox or a nerve block can give you a little bit of a relief so you can feel a little bit better, where now you feel like, yeah, you know what, I can make some changes. I can do the things that I need to do to give my body what it needs. Great. In that sense, it can be a great tool to give people a little bit of relief so that they can get a leg up and they can actually address what the underlying root causes are and they can start to feel better. But unfortunately, that's not how it's presented to people. It's presented as once, you're going to have to do this, right, for the rest of your life. Every 3 months you're going to be in here with the needles, etc. And like everything else, it stops working after a while because you're not addressing the root cause and your body continues to generate more and more of the symptoms that we're trying to suppress. So I hope this was helpful to kind of make some of these connections for you. If this resonates with you, please reach out. Please schedule a free consult call. I would love to talk with you. We'll talk about what's going on with your migraines, any other health concerns that you have, and if I can help you, I will tell you that. If I don't think I'll be able to help you, I will tell you that too. So if you've been looking for an alternative to this, if you've been hearing some of this messaging that your brain is faulty and your wiring is defective and, somehow you're born this way, I'm here to tell you you're not. you can, when you have the right game plan and give your body what it needs, your body will respond and start to feel better. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.